Steve Harvey. The voice, the suit, the laughter. It's easy to see the man now. He was just a little boy in a freezing house in Cleveland, sleeping through hunger, stuttering through shame, and whispering a dream no one believed in. Not even heat, not even food. Just that dream, I want to be on TV. They laughed. Life laughed louder, but he never stopped saying it. Because this is the story of how poverty tried to break him and failed. Let's go back to where it all began. Every legend has an origin. Some begin in glitter and lights. But for Steve Harvey, it began with humiliation. A tearing sound that split more than paper. It split belief. In a cramped, dimly lit classroom in Cleveland, Ohio, where heat was a luxury and rust was a permanent fixture, young Steve sat at his desk with hope clenched in a pencil. He was a small black boy in a world that expected even smaller dreams. Around him, children were writing down the safe answers. Firefighter, bus driver, nurse. Occupations the neighborhood understood, ambitions that didn't provoke laughter. But Steve, he wrote something dangerous. I want to be on TV. 7 words. Just that. No explanation, no apology. He didn't write it to be bold. He wrote it because it was already a truth living inside him. He saw himself on the screen before the world ever could. He didn't know the steps, the path, the industry. All he had was the vision. But the world he lived in, starting with his teacher, wasn't ready for that kind of defiance. The next day, she stood before the class, waving his assignment like a punchline. TV, she sneered, narrowing her eyes. Who do you think you are? You know people like you don't end up on television. And with a theatrical rip, she tore the paper in 2. The sound echoed through Steve's body like thunder through bone. The laughter that followed wasn't just from children. It was systemic, generational, cruel. It was society speaking through a teacher's mouth. Steve sat frozen, not crying, not speaking, just absorbing. That was the first moment he realized some dreams aren't just laughed at, they're destroyed. Or at least people will try. But at home, something different happened. His mother noticed the slump in his shoulders, the silence in his eyes. When he told her what happened, she didn't rush to defend him. She went to a drawer, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and said calmly, "Write it again. And this time, don't hand it in. Keep it for you." That was the moment Steve Harvey learned the most powerful rebellion isn't yelling. It's rewriting the dream when someone else tears it. So he wrote it again. Then again. He taped it above his bed, whispered it into his pillow. I want to be on TV, not just once, but every day. That sentence became armor, a secret anthem, a promise he made to himself in the dark. And years later, when millions were tuning in to watch him host shows, tell jokes, inspire strangers, that same teacher turned on her television. And there he was, the boy whose paper she had torn, the voice they tried to silence, now speaking to the world with purpose, with grace, and with a microphone no one could rip from his hands. Because some dreams don't die when they're torn, they grow louder. In the parts of Cleveland that maps forgot and politicians ignored, poverty didn't hide, it screamed. It came through the cracks in the windows like the icy wind cutting through paper-thin walls and skin that had long stopped expecting warmth. It moaned through the empty refrigerator and creaked beneath splintered floorboards that cried with every step. For young Steve Harvey, this wasn't some poetic hardship. It was just life. There was no central heating, no second pair of shoes, no certainty that the lights would stay on or that dinner would happen. But what there always was, what blanketed the home more than any quilt, was silence. The kind of silence so heavy it sinks into your bones. The kind that teaches children to carry adult worries. At night, under covers too thin to fight the Ohio winter, Steve would lie still staring at a ceiling that held no answers. His breath visible in the cold, he'd whisper to himself not to dream, but to remember. I was born to be different. He didn't dare say it aloud in the beginning, because even words freeze in winter. But deep down, buried beneath the stammer and the shame, was a voice he refused to let die. He whispered it like scripture, like protest, like a secret pact with the future. Poverty didn't just rob him of comfort, it tried to rob him of vision. It told him that dreaming was dangerous, that boys who looked like him, who spoke like him, who stuttered when they got nervous, should settle, keep their heads down, be grateful for whatever scraps the world threw their way. But Steve couldn't. He couldn't stop seeing something more, even when his stomach growled, even when the teacher rolled her eyes, even when the church pews offered more guilt than grace. He kept that voice alive. He didn't fit in at school, didn't feel at home. He had no outlet, no champion, just a persistent fire flickering inside a body trained to expect cold. And then there was the stutter, the cruel twist of fate that made him the target of laughter every time he opened his mouth. The world mocked the sound of his voice before it ever heard what he had to say. But inside, another voice whispered louder than the ridicule, "You were not born to disappear." The world doesn't expect a stuttering boy from a broken home to rise. It doesn't expect the loudest future to come from the quietest room. But Steve Harvey was listening not to the noise around him, but to the calling within him. Poverty tried to drown him with hunger, with invisibility, with silence. But what it didn't know is that dreams, when clenched tightly enough, won't fade. They fight back. And Steve Harvey's voice, once trembled, once silenced, was only just beginning to rise. He couldn't say his own name without stuttering. To the world, Steve Harvey was just a boy who couldn't speak right. A kid who tripped over words like they were barbed wire. Every syllable a battlefield. Every sentence a struggle between breath and shame. And shame always won. He hated roll call, hated being asked to read aloud, hated the way the class would freeze when he tried to speak, then explode with laughter when he failed. His tongue twisted, his lips trembled, and the more he feared the sound of his voice, the more it betrayed him. Stuttering doesn't just break speech, it breaks spirit. It makes you question whether your voice even belongs in the world. So Steve stopped speaking. For years, he said less and less, not because he had nothing to say, but because no one would wait to hear it. Silence became safer. But silence is a dangerous place when you have dreams screaming inside you. Luckily, his father saw something others didn't. One night, after watching Steve's face fall for the 100th time, he sat him down and said something that would change everything. Write it down. Whatever you want to be, write it down. Tape it to the wall. Read it every morning. Read it every night. Make it your prayer. Steve didn't understand it then, but he obeyed. He found a scrap of paper, wrote the words, "I want to be on TV," and taped it to the wall beside his bed. And every day, with a broken voice, he whispered it. He couldn't say a full sentence in public, but he could say that. Over time, he began to believe it, not because he had proof, but because faith doesn't require proof, only repetition. He studied the voices on television, how they paused, how they punched lines, how they laughed at their own jokes. He couldn't speak like them yet, but he listened like his life depended on it. Because it did. Steve Harvey didn't become a great speaker by accident. He became one because for years he wasn't allowed to speak. And when your voice is taken from you, you spend your whole life fighting to get it back. So he kept whispering, kept reading that paper, kept believing that one day the world would listen and he would be ready. Because sometimes the ones who speak the loudest are the ones who were once forced to be silent. Destiny rarely arrives in grand ballrooms. Sometimes it walks into a smoky bar wearing cheap carpet and smelling like spilled beer. It was 1985. Steve Harvey was exhausted working as a carpet cleaner. Scraping by paycheck to paycheck, never enough to get ahead, barely enough to survive. The dream of being on TV still lived on his bedroom wall. But in real life, that dream felt like a punchline. He was 28, no formal training, no agent, no stage. Then came a dare. A friend told him about an amateur comedy night at a local club. "You're always funny," the friend said. "Why don't you get up there and do something with it?" Steve laughed it off at first. But that night, something in him stirred. Not courage, something older. A spark from that old piece of paper. "I want to be on TV." He didn't know if he was ready, but he knew he was done waiting. He wrote a few jokes on a napkin, borrowed someone's decent shirt, and drove to the club with butterflies clawing through his stomach. He had never touched a microphone before, never stood in front of strangers with nothing but his words. When they called his name, time slowed. The light was blinding. The mic squeaked. His voice cracked. But he began. The first joke landed awkwardly. The second gone with a stutter. But on the third, something happened. They laughed. Really laughed. And in that laughter, Steve found oxygen he'd never breathed before. For the first time in his life, his voice didn't betray him. It delivered him. The next 5 minutes were a blur, not because he was nervous, but because he was alive. Jokes poured out of him like they'd been waiting years for this moment. And when the set was over, the room clapped not politely, but with joy. Steve stepped off stage, trembling. He went to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and broke down crying. His reflection stared back at him like a stranger who had just been found. "I was born tonight," he whispered, "not reborn, born." That wasn't just an open mic. It was resurrection. He hadn't made $1. No agent had spotted him. No contract was signed. But something greater had happened. Steve Harvey had stepped into himself. From that moment forward, he wasn't just a man with a dream, he was a man with a mission. The stage was no longer a fantasy. It was his future. And that cheap bar with sticky floors, it became sacred ground. The place where the boy who couldn't speak finally made the world listen. The spotlight had touched him once, just once, but it was enough to set his soul on fire. After that first night on stage, when laughter met his broken voice like a long-lost friend, Steve Harvey knew he had found his calling. But life doesn't always reward clarity with comfort. And for the next 3 years, that calling would cost him everything. The applause faded, the gigs dried up, and the world moved on. But Steve couldn't because he had tasted purpose, and that taste doesn't leave your tongue. So he held on. When the money ran out, he lived in his car, a rusted 1976 Ford Tempo that became his shelter, his prison, and his church. The back seat was his bed. A towel folded over a Bible served as his pillow. He parked in Walmart lots behind gas stations and on forgotten side streets where police wouldn't tap on the window. The air inside the car was always damp, sometimes from rain, sometimes from tears. He learned to clean up in public restrooms, splashing cold water on his face while ignoring the stares from strangers. He kept one decent shirt pressed by the weight of his own desperation, ready in case anyone would give him 5 minutes on a stage. Sometimes he drove 300 miles for a $75 set, only to be told the show was canceled. Sometimes he made it. Sometimes he slept hungry. He often fasted not for faith, but because his wallet demanded it. The pain of hunger paled in comparison to the pain of being forgotten. But even in that darkness, even when he was empty, Steve still spoke the words he had written as a child. I want to be on TV. Every night. Like a vow. Like a map. Like oxygen. He wasn't saying it to convince anyone. He was saying it to remind himself he still existed. It wasn't a dream anymore. It was identity. That single sentence was the thread stitching his sanity together. The nights were long, cold, and cruel. But Steve didn't curse them. He counted them. Because if he could survive one more, maybe the light would come tomorrow. Maybe someone would call. Maybe one door would open. And until that day came, he clung to the only thing that had never left him: faith. Raw, bruised, illogical faith. Not the kind they preach in pews. The kind you bleed for. The kind that teaches you to find warmth in your own breath and family in the echo of your own voice. Steve Harvey didn't sleep in that car because he was lost. He slept there because he refused to go backward. Because a man with nothing left to lose and a voice still whispering truth in the dark is more powerful than any crowd, any check, or any stage. By the time Steve Harvey found himself parked under the thick humidity of a Florida summer 3 years into homelessness, even his faith began to flicker. He was physically exhausted, spiritually depleted, and emotionally worn down to the marrow. Each breath inside that car tasted like rust, and each morning felt like a punishment for dreaming. He had given everything to comedy. His comfort, his marriage, his connection to his children, and still the world offered nothing back. On that particular day in Pensacola, he sat in silence, slouched in the back seat of his Ford Tempo, staring at a sky that held no answers. That's when he remembered to check his answering machine. He had rigged a portable voice recorder to a payphone system, a desperate invention for a man with no address. And blinking red on that little box were 2 messages. The first nearly stopped his heart. Hi, this is Showtime at the Apollo. We saw your tape. We'd love to invite you to perform on our stage. The show is this Sunday. Please call us back as soon as possible. For a second, Steve just stood there frozen. The Apollo. Harlem. The Mecca of black entertainment. The stage where legends were born and broken. He felt like every second of pain he had ever endured had led to that single invitation. But then came the second message, and it nearly broke him again. Mr. Harvey, we haven't heard from you. We're giving your slot to someone else unless we receive confirmation in the next few hours. Just like that, the door that had opened began to slam shut. Steve didn't have a cell phone. He didn't even have $100 in his pocket. He had no idea how to get to New York. But he ran to the closest payphone and begged the producers for another chance. Miraculously, they said yes. He had 72 hours to cross 1,000 miles. He had $35, but he also had something far more powerful: desperation sharpened into purpose. Through hustling, borrowing, begging, and believing, Steve made it. When he stood on the Apollo stage, wearing a suit he could barely afford, and shoes that knew hunger better than comfort, he didn't just perform, he exploded. The crowd, notorious for booing at first sight, fell into hysterics with his very first punchline. He brought down the house. That night, Steve Harvey didn't just win over a crowd. He claimed his seat at the table of destiny. And all of it, his survival, his second chance, his career, hinged on 2 messages. One that offered a miracle. One that nearly stole it. Sometimes your whole life turns because you choose to answer before it's too late. After Apollo, the doors didn't just open, they broke wide. Offers began to flow in. Steve Harvey was finally being seen. But what the world didn't know, what they never saw behind the laughter, was that every joke came with a scar. Every standing ovation came from a man still learning how to stand. His comedy wasn't built in clubs, it was forged in suffering. The cadence of his timing was the rhythm of survival. The punchlines were therapy disguised as entertainment. The laugh you hear Steve once said is the wound I turned inside out. And he meant it. His stories weren't crafted in writing rooms or writers' workshops. They were born in the freezing back seat of his Ford. They were built in moments when hunger clawed at his ribs, when humiliation drowned his dignity, when he would get on stage pretending to make people laugh while wondering if he had enough gas to sleep somewhere warm. People laughed because he was funny. But Steve knew that they were laughing at pain that had been distilled into something palatable. He didn't tell jokes to impress, he told them to survive. Each laugh was a breath. Each cheer a heartbeat. Comedy became the language through which he translated his suffering into redemption. There's something unexplainably powerful about making people laugh while you're still bleeding. But Steve never showed the wound. He turned trauma into rhythm rejection, into delivery abandonment, into a signature style. He became the guy everyone called hilarious without knowing he'd been crying in his car just weeks before. Fame came with TV appearances, club tours, interviews, fans. But none of it healed the ache still living underneath. He'd laugh with the crowd and go home to silence. He'd smile for the cameras and then stare at the wall, wondering how long it would all last. He had climbed out of hell, but hell had left fingerprints on everything. Still, he kept showing up, kept writing, kept performing. Because in every audience, he saw himself someone trying to laugh through the noise, trying to believe that laughter could still reach them. Steve Harvey didn't become successful because he was funny. He became successful because he turned unspeakable pain into something that made people feel seen. And when the world finally embraced him, they weren't just laughing at the jokes, they were honoring the journey. Success didn't come slowly for Steve Harvey. It came like a tidal wave. After Apollo doors didn't creak open, they blew off the hinges. TV appearances turned into contracts. Club tours turned into sold-out arenas. His name went from being whispered in green rooms to printed in bold on marquees. He had arrived. But with each standing ovation came a silence he couldn't escape. Because while the world was finally listening, the people closest to him were starting to fade. The higher he climbed, the lonelier it became. His days were filled with producers and press interviews, but his nights were filled with absence. The absence of home-cooked meals, bedtime stories for his children, the sound of a wife's voice saying, "You made it." He was living the dream, and yet something inside him felt unmoored. He would smile on stage and walk off wondering where the man beneath the suit had gone. The schedule was relentless. Morning radio shows, midday rehearsals, late-night performances. Cities blurred. Sleep vanished. And the man who once prayed just to be seen now prayed for rest. His crown, fame, money, recognition came with a weight no one warned him about. He missed birthdays, missed holidays, missed moments he could never get back. There were nights he flew into cities only to collapse in hotel rooms too cold, too quiet, too unfamiliar. He began to measure success not in dollars, but in the growing pile of apologies he owed his children. He knew how to make strangers laugh, but not always how to make his wife feel heard. He became two people, the performer and the man. And the gap between them widened with every standing ovation. He built an empire, but his foundation was cracking. He had mansions now, but no one to sit with him at the dinner table. He wore suits tailored to perfection, but they couldn't tailor the loneliness away. He had built a kingdom, but in doing so, he had slowly exiled himself from the ones who once held him up. And that realization that success had come at the cost of presence began to eat away at him from the inside. Steve Harvey wasn't just tired, he was hollowing. The boy, who once whispered dreams in a freezing car, now stood in front of millions, but couldn't always feel their warmth. That's the part no one sees when the applause fades, and all that's left is a man staring in the mirror, asking if the price of the crown was too high to wear. Fame is loud, but heartbreak, it whispers in hotel rooms, in empty chairs, in the eyes of the people who no longer wait up for you. At the peak of his success, Steve Harvey could make arenas roar with laughter, yet he couldn't keep his home from falling silent. His first marriage had already crumbled under the weight of struggle and absence, but it was the second loss that nearly shattered him. When you've risen from nothing, you believe that success will shield you from loss, that the applause, the money, the recognition will somehow keep the people you love close. But Steve learned the hardest truth of all. You can make millions of people happy and still lose the ones who needed you most. He wasn't a bad man. He was just a man who had forgotten how to stop moving. Comedy had become his obsession, not for fame, but for survival. But while he was fighting to never be homeless again, he didn't realize his absence was creating a different kind of homelessness for his family. Missed recitals, broken promises, rushed calls between flights, it all added up. And one day he looked up, and they were gone. His wife, his kids. The walls of his house echoed louder than any crowd he had ever stood before. He had become the man who could stand in front of 20,000 strangers, but couldn't sit still long enough to have dinner with the people who called him Dad. And when the dust settled, when the cameras turned off, and the noise died down, Steve Harvey was left with a mirror, a stack of regrets, and $1,700 in his bank account. That's all. After everything, the shows, the laughter, the sacrifice, $1,700. He had made millions and lost them twice. But what stung most wasn't the money. It was the look in his children's eyes when they stopped calling. The silence on birthdays. The way they learned to live without him. It would have been easy to blame the road, the business, the schedule. But Steve knew better. He had chosen it. And in choosing it, he had unintentionally taught his family that the stage came first. That realization didn't hit him all at once. It came slowly, like grief through moments too quiet, hotel rooms too dark, and memories he couldn't replay without feeling the sting. Steve Harvey didn't just lose everything once, he lost it twice. The first time, the world took it. The second time, he gave it away without meaning to, but with consequences that would shape the rest of his life. Most people believe rock bottom is a place. For Steve Harvey, it was a number $1,700. That was all he had left after years of touring. Sacrificing, building, and losing. $1,700 sat in his account like a cruel joke, a whisper from the universe saying, "Is this what it was all for?" But Steve didn't cry. He laughed. A sharp, hollow laugh, not from humor, but from the kind of despair that becomes too deep for tears. The IRS was hunting him. He owed years in back taxes, and the weight of possible prison loomed large. His family was fractured. His spirit was tired. He wasn't just broke financially, he was emotionally bankrupt. And yet, something stirred. Because Steve Harvey had been here before. Cold, lost, broke, and alone. But not quite like this. This time, he had something else, a voice, a platform, a tiny daily radio segment he had been offered 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. when most of the world was still asleep. The pay wasn't impressive. The audience wasn't massive. But it was something. And Steve treated that microphone like it was his last shot at redemption. He showed up every morning, disciplined to the second. He poured stories into the silence, speaking not to millions, but to the few people awake enough to listen. And in those early hours, something began to change. Not out there in him. The man who had once waited for opportunities began creating them. The laughter he once used to hide pain now became his bridge to healing. He didn't just do comedy anymore, he shared truth failures lessons. He talked about God, about mistakes, about second chances, and people listened. The radio gig turned into syndication. Syndication turned into national reach. Calls poured in. Steve Harvey, once a man who couldn't afford a flight to New York, was now speaking into homes across America before the sun even rose. That $1,700 was gone fast, but what it bought him wasn't food or luxury. It bought him discipline. It taught him the miracle doesn't come when you sit and wait. It comes when you rise before dawn and work. He rebuilt everything slowly, painfully, righteously. Not with noise, but with consistency, with humility, with a voice that now echoed with gratitude instead of desperation. Steve Harvey didn't find a miracle. He became one built from the ashes of failure, held together by faith, and a $1,700 reminder that rock bottom is never where the story ends. It's where you learn how to build with nothing but your voice. December 20th, 2015, millions were watching cameras, rolling music swelling. Steve Harvey stood center stage at the Miss Universe pageant dressed in a crisp white tuxedo, smiling with the poise of a seasoned host. Everything seemed perfect. He had reached another mountaintop, the face of a global event, the man trusted to announce the most beautiful woman in the world. He opened the envelope. He read the name, Miss Colombia. The crowd erupted. Confetti rained. The crown was placed. A dream fulfilled, until it wasn't. Moments later, as the cameras continued rolling, Steve's voice returned, softer, shaken. He walked back on stage, gripping the mic like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Then, with millions still watching, he said the words no host ever wants to utter. I have to apologize. The first runner-up is Colombia. Miss Universe 2015 is Miss Philippines. Silence. Shock. Gasps. In the span of 30 seconds, Steve Harvey became a meme, a headline, a punchline. The image of him holding the wrong card went viral instantly. Commentators shredded him. Jokes flew across late-night shows and Twitter timelines. It was global humiliation in real time. He could have run, could have blamed the teleprompter, the producer, the font, the chaos of live TV. But he didn't. He stood there face to face with embarrassment and owned it completely. It was my mistake, he said again and again. He apologized publicly, privately, repeatedly. The next year, when Miss Universe returned, many assumed he wouldn't. But he did. He walked back onto that same stage, looked into the eyes of the world, and said, "Thank you for giving me a second chance." That moment, more than any joke he ever told, defined his legacy. Because in a culture obsessed with perfection, Steve Harvey chose something else: accountability. He didn't hide from his shame. He turned it into a lesson. In doing so, he taught millions watching around the world that integrity doesn't mean never falling. It means standing up publicly when you do. The man who once whispered a dream from the back seat of a car was now standing tall in front of the entire planet, showing them what redemption really looked like. He didn't escape the storm, he walked through it head held high. Because real legends aren't remembered for what went right. They're remembered for how they handled what went horribly wrong. By the time Steve Harvey met Marjorie, he was a man rebuilt, successful, respected, but still carrying invisible bruises. He had fame, fortune, a syndicated radio show, TV hosting gigs, and a name etched into pop culture. But what he didn't have was peace. His days were structured, his voice heard across continents, but when the spotlight dimmed, he returned to a quiet that didn't feel like rest. It felt like loneliness wearing a suit. And then, as if written into a chapter long overdue, she walked in. Marjorie was not impressed by the stage. She didn't need him to be a star. She needed him to be present. She didn't fall in love with the legend she saw. The man beneath the laughter, the man who was still afraid to trust fully, still healing from wounds no one could see. Their love didn't roar. It steadied. She brought silence that soothed instead of suffocated. In a world that had demanded so much from him, Marjorie asked for something simple: truth. And Steve, for the first time in decades, didn't have to perform. He could exhale. He could sit on the porch with her barefoot and quiet, and not feel the need to prove anything. He often said, 85% of everything I have came after I married her. But he wasn't talking about wealth. He was talking about wholeness. She reintroduced him to grace, to softness, to the kind of stillness that doesn't come from success. It comes from love that sees all of you and stays anyway. She didn't just become his wife, she became his lighthouse. When critics came, when headlines swirled, when his past tried to knock on his door, Marjorie stood like a shield. She reminded him who he was, not the man on stage, not the host on TV, but the boy who once believed he could be great, and the man who had become it despite everything. Together, they didn't just build a family, they built restoration. She helped mend his relationship with his children. She gave him a new rhythm to life, one that included Sundays at home, long conversations, prayer before bed, and knowing someone would still be there when the applause ended. Steve Harvey had been many things: homeless, broken, famous, mocked, adored. But Marjorie made him whole. And in a world where giants are expected to never fall, she reminded him that even the strongest men need someone to remind them they're still worthy of love, not because of what they've built, but simply because of who they are when they finally stop running. Steve Harvey had spent decades learning how to be a man on stage, in boardrooms, under pressure. But nothing in his life prepared him for the moment a child not of his blood would call him dad. Marjorie came into his world with more than love. She brought children from a previous marriage, young lives that had been shaped by their own histories, their own walls. Steve, still carrying his own guilt for missed moments with his biological children, was cautious. He had failed before. He had hurt people without meaning to. He didn't want to promise something he couldn't keep. But children don't need perfection, they need presence. And for the first time, Steve showed up quietly, consistently, without trying to impress, just trying to be there. Over time, those children, especially Marjorie's son, began tweeting. Not the celebrity, not the comic, but the man who kept showing up to every game, every dinner, every quiet conversation. And then, one day, that boy looked him in the eye and said the words that shattered every wall Steve had built around his heart. "You gave me your last name. No one ever loved me like you have. You're the only father I've ever known." Steve didn't speak. He couldn't. He cried not with shame, not with regret, but with release. Because in that moment, all the things he thought he had lost, the broken bonds with his own kids, the guilt of his absences, the shadow of not being enough, began to dissolve. That one sentence undid decades of inner punishment. It didn't erase the past, but it rewrote the man he was becoming. He wasn't just forgiven. He was trusted. Trusted to protect, to guide, to love, not because he had to, but because he chose to. And that choice was mutual. They chose him back, From then on, Steve Harvey no longer introduced himself as just a husband or an entertainer. He was a father to his own kids and to the ones who opened their hearts and let him in. He attended graduations with full attention. He made time for calls. He cooked, joked, and prayed with his family, not to make up for the past, but to build a new one, a better one. Because sometimes fatherhood isn't just biology, it's healing. It's a second chance. It's being seen not as who you were, but who you decided to become. Steve Harvey didn't just climb out of poverty, he built stairs behind him. Brick by brick, show by show, setback by revelation. What began as a whisper in a cold car, "I want to be on TV," eventually echoed into something far bigger than ratings or applause. It became the foundation of a global brand. But unlike many who rise fast and fall faster, Steve didn't build his empire on talent alone. He built it on faith, a gritty, daily, non-negotiable discipline of believing in what hadn't yet arrived. Long before Family Feud became a cultural juggernaut, before his face became synonymous with morning inspiration, Steve was laying the groundwork for something greater than entertainment. He was crafting a legacy. His mornings began with prayer. His meetings ended with gratitude. And in between was the grind producing writing, investing, hosting, mentoring. He expanded his reach not to show off, but to show up. From best-selling books to mentorship programs, from launching clothing lines to developing housing initiatives, Steve turned his name into a key one that opened doors for others. He created jobs platforms and scholarships. He didn't want to be a celebrity. He wanted to be a blueprint, a map for anyone who had been counted out, laughed at, or left behind. And his message was always the same: believe harder, work longer, pray louder. He didn't just build Harvey Enterprises. He built Steve Harvey Global, with arms that reached into Africa, into schools, into churches, into families who had never heard of comedy, but who now knew what redemption looked like. But even as the numbers soared, millions of followers, multiple shows, international deals, Steve never let go of the one habit that kept him grounded. Reading the same words his father once told him to write on the wall. Write the vision, make it plain. Speak it every morning. That wasn't a slogan, that was survival. Even with wealth and fame, he feared losing the one thing he valued most: purpose. Because when you've been homeless hungry, forgotten success doesn't taste like champagne. It tastes like air, like freedom, like sitting in your own office looking at your own name on a wall and remembering every night you cried into a steering wheel thinking God had left you behind. Steve Harvey didn't inherit a kingdom. He forged one, not out of gold, but out of obedience. And while others chased the spotlight, he learned how to be the light for his family, his faith, and for millions who now look at him and say, if he made it, maybe I still can too. Today, Steve Harvey wakes up in a mansion in Atlanta, but he still rises before the sun. Not to check contracts or chase deals, but to bow his head in silence. In the stillness of morning, before the noise of the world returns, he prays. Not for more, but for less. Less distraction, less ego, less of anything that might make him forget where he came from. He still reads the same sentence he wrote as a child. I want to be on TV, not because he needs a reminder of what he's achieved, but because he never wants to forget the boy who wrote it. The boy who stuttered, who starved, who cried into a steering wheel in the dark. That boy still lives inside him, and Steve lets him speak first every day. He has more money than he ever dreamed, more fame than he ever wanted, and more responsibility than he ever asked for. But he carries it all the same. Because to him being blessed is not a reward, it's an assignment. And every day he shows up to serve, on set, on air, on stage, in schools, in prisons, in quiet conversations behind closed doors with people who no one else will listen to. Steve Harvey has become a bridge between where people are and where they dream of going. Not by preaching perfection, but by telling the raw, bloody, embarrassing truth of a life that nearly never made it. He no longer fears failure. He fears wasting the pain that shaped him. That's why he still laughs like a kid, still cries without shame, and still prays like it's his only weapon. Because it is. And because somewhere tonight there's another Steve Cold forgotten, holding on to a sentence the world keeps trying to tear up. To you, wherever you are, maybe you're in a storm, maybe you're in silence, maybe you've stopped believing this story is for you, not to glorify a man, but to prove that you don't need perfect conditions to grow into something eternal. You just need faith. You just need one reason to wake up one more day. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own fight, your own dream, or someone you love who's still in the dark, don't let it stop here. Share it. Let someone else know they're not alone. And if you want more stories like this, stories that honor pain, celebrate survival, and remind the world that legends aren't born, they're built. Subscribe to USA Legends Never Fade. Because as long as there's someone out there still whispering a dream in the dark, this channel will keep shining light on their truth. This documentary was created for educational and inspirational purposes under fair use. It contains no graphic, misleading, or harmful content.